In this reflection, I'm returning to Dennis Ford's book, The Search for Meaning, and I'm looking at the chapter on metaphysics. Let's see what Ford has to say. Historically, the rejection of metaphysics separates us from previous ages, and perhaps even today, from the majority of humankind, according to Ford. For moderns who accept the tenets of empirical science, the question of whether there is anything beyond the physical world seems settled a long time ago, and for good reason. The benefits of science and of deliberately limiting ourselves to physics are that it works spectacularly well. Penicillin, for example, is a more effective treatment of a bacterial infection than is prayer. Progress and the associated movement from superstition and magic to science is a familiar and triumphant story. Nevertheless, persistent critics of science, or more accurately, critics of scientism and the dismissal of the metaphysics on which it rests, point to at least two deficiencies. First, critics argue that scientism excludes a good part of what makes life human. This would include beauty and love and values and, well, most of life's meanings. They argue that the material ontological plane is not all that there is, or in other words, all that matters is not matter. The dismissal of metaphysics has a second deficiency. It fails, according to Ford, on pragmatic grounds. It simply does not lead us to a better life. Critics argue that alienation, anomie, nihilism, meaninglessness, and a persuasive spiritual malaise have become a recurring theme in our age of reason, probably better called an age of anxiety. So the upshot is a person who restricts his or her attention only to what can be counted and measured and weighed lives necessarily in a very poor world. Ford tells us that the theologian Paul Tillich defined religion as the ultimate concern. This can be taken either psychologically or ontologically. An ontological reading of ultimate concern suggests that religion is concerned with what is in fact ontologically ultimate. In this view, then, reality is graduated into different levels. Some levels are more real than others, and correspondingly some concerns are more ultimate than others. Religion is an ultimate concern because it is concerned with that which is ultimate, meaning that which is most real and most true. So, according to Ford, in this view, our world is meaningless because we are concerned with a level of reality where meaning cannot flourish or be sustained. For some of us, to speak about what is most true or most real goes against the pervasive assumptions of the world in which we live nowadays. Viewing the world as exclusively material seems to make common sense to us, and so we have difficulty with describing something as being more or less real than something else. That's because we have learned through science that there is one and only one ontological level, and that level is exclusively materialistic and value neutral. The heart of science, according to Ford, and the materialism on which it rests, is the motivation to control. Science has made a Promethean bargain with the knowing world. X counts as knowledge if it leads to prediction and to control. Science, then, is selective about that to which it's attentive. It is concerned primarily only with those aspects of truth and reality that are useful in a manipulative way to achieve pragmatic ends. By the conditions of the Promethean contract, then, all truth is pragmatic or instrumental in science. That is, truth is limited to that which leads to desired ends. The control motive thus leads to an epistemology of empiricism, which in turn leads to an ontology of naturalism. Modernity is an outlook in which this world, existing as it does on a single ontological plane, is the only one that is genuinely countenanced and affirmed. The hallmark of science, then, is that it operates on a single ontological level, whose focus is on the most external and material aspects of the universe. A great strength of scientific knowledge is that its truths are publicly and intersubjectively available and objectively verifiable, because it is based on the lowest and thus most common and widely distributed level of being. In contrast, Ford says, wisdom can be attained only by bringing into play higher powers and levels of self-consciousness, and knowledge of higher levels, which we mean as wisdom, requires personal transformation, not seeing different things, but seeing things differently. And what this means then in practice is that higher knowledge or wisdom is not available to everyone. Ford suggests that we should not dismiss the higher levels of reality as non-existent or merely subjective fantasies simply because they are not accessible to us, or because our glimpses of reality are fleeting and uncertain. An example may help here. Ford writes that the fact that most of us cannot follow the intricacies of quantum physics does not mean that it is unreal or not true. It only means I have an inadequate instrument of understanding. Genuine achievement, then, is always undemocratic and elitist. According to Ford, our happiness lies in developing our highest faculties, gaining knowledge of the highest things, and, if possible, seeing God, or at least seeing the good. If persons develop their lower faculties, which they share with the animals, and correspondingly gain knowledge of only the lowest levels of reality, they will fail to reach their highest human potentials. The point is that meaning does not reside in the lower, but in the highest levels of reality. Aldous Huxley once wrote, "There comes a time when one asks even of Shakespeare and even of Beethoven, is this all?" When that time comes, Ford tells us that Hinduism proclaims that we turn to higher things and the level of being that fulfills our truest natures. What do people really want then? Well, we want being and knowledge and joy, and we want it infinitely. In short, what we really want is liberation and release from the impediments separating us from the limitless being, consciousness, and bliss of our heart's desire. That is to say, we renounce the finite and lower levels of being for the higher. If the lower levels of pleasure and success and duty are emptied of meaning, then our hope rests on the infinite, and we are no longer constricted by the extrinsic and pragmatic purposes. We can see reality whole, and we can see things as they are. Ford introduces us to Houston Smith, who suggests that the wisdom traditions, which are at the core of the world's religions, might be helpful here. Smith distinguishes 4 levels of reality, the first of which is the terrestrial reality. This includes the visible and the material world of science. The intermediate reality, the second level of reality, relates to the inferring capabilities of the typal world. The third level reality is the celestial reality, and this would include the level of Plato's forms, or objects which are eternal and undiluted. The fourth and final level of reality then would be the infinite level, and the infinite level goes beyond or transcends our conceptual categories and is beyond the inadequate instruments of our own language and concepts to perceive it. In Buddhism, this is the point where the adept silently points to the moon and abandons the craft that enables us to cross the river. To be frank, Ford tells us that understanding at this highest level, beyond words and images, is difficult in the extreme, and is reserved for the very few mystics and adepts whose instruments of perception match the level of being they seek to understand, and with which they hope to merge, or, in a moment of awakening, they know they have been merged with all along.